so we graciously agreed. I'm really honored to be here. This is just an incredible event. This panel is sort of the second part of an event that we had the first part of at UNC last month. And so this is sort of a part two of how we respond. And I have to say, you all are sort of putting us to shame. This has just been delightful so far. I've learned a lot already, and I think that, not to disparage the great work we're doing at Chapel Hill, but I think that the work at UNCG and this community is just truly impressive.
As Dr. Butler said, my name is Kevin Kim. I'm the new Associate Director for the Asian American Center. I just started in February. And it truly is an honor and a pleasure to be with you here today. Special thanks to our wonderful partners at UNC Greensboro for hosting. And thank you all for the invitation. I am here to facilitate, but to listen and to hear all the great work that you're doing, to be an interlocutor, to help connect folks together, to help do the work that needs to be done, that you all are doing, and keep on fighting that good fight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Becky, who will introduce our panelists.
Great. I should also introduce myself. I work at the Carolina Asia Center. I'm the Assistant Director for Southeast Asia Initiatives over there. And we're lucky enough to receive a grant from the Luce Foundation for 5 years for something called the Bringing Southeast Asia Home initiative. And so we are trying very hard to build up our Southeast Asian Studies program. And for us, that not only means Southeast Asia in Southeast Asia, but Southeast Asia in North Carolina. So we are really interested in strengthening the connections between our institution and community partners, including, of course, all of you. And just to put it out there, I see it as sort of my personal responsibility to advocate to the university that as the flagship for the UNC system in the state, they should be doing a heck of a lot more to support our local communities. So if any of you have great ideas about how we can get them to do that, I am all ears. But we don't have a ton of time, so we want to reserve most of it for our speakers. I'm going to facilitate this part, and then Dr. Kim is going to facilitate the second half. So I will give just some very brief introductions, and we'll get to it. You all just heard from Sara Colm, co-chair of the Research Network. She's a researcher, historian, community organizer, specialist on the human rights and indigenous peoples in Cambodia and Vietnam, and has been working with Southeast Asian communities in Asia and the U.S. for a very long time. Raleigh Bailey, PhD, is the Emeritus Director and former Senior Research Scientist at UNCG Center for New North Carolinians, and former Director of Lutheran Family Services Refugee Program in Greensboro. And Lorraine Ahearn, also PhD, is an Assistant Professor of Journalism at Hlong University and was previously a projects writer at the Annapolis Capital, an investigative reporter and Metro columnist at Greensboro News and Record. And between 1990 and 2010, she covered immigrant communities and refugee issues in North Carolina. So we are very excited to have these three folks to talk about the early resettlement of the Montagnard community in this space. And there's a few sort of prompting questions in the program, so I'm just going to refer to those. The very last one, though, is when, if ever, does one cease being a refugee or labeled as such? And so, as it's the last question, I would just want to keep it in everybody's minds to make sure we don't run out of time to talk about it. I wonder if you all could just touch on sort of what you understand to be the geopolitical factors and the different waves of Montagnard resettlement, the conditions in Vietnam, the current slowdown of Montagnard refugees, and in particular, how prepared the Montagnard community and local state players have been for the new arrival of Montagnard and other Southeast Asian refugees, and other refugees in general, as is relevant. I know you all are kind of coming at it from different perspectives, so I'll just touch on which topics you feel are the most, you're most knowledgeable about. So, Raleigh, maybe I'll go?
Yeah, I'll go first because I'm oldest. My wife told me this morning, this is not a professional attire. And I told her, well, I'm retired. Okay, 1980s, I was director of the Refugee Resettlement Program, Lutheran Family Services. There were 2 resettlement agencies that had offices in North Carolina, Lutheran Family Services in Greensboro and Catholic Social Services in Charlotte. I got a phone call early 1986 from my national cohort saying that the State Department is asking LRS if they would resettle a special group of people, and it's really complicated, but we think that this agency might be the best place, and would you find out if people are interested? And we had a community organization called Triad Refugee Interfaith Program, which is TRIP, very cute, and it included congregations, it included employers, it included other supporters and allies, and we thought, oh, sure, bring them on. But I said, well, why us? And he said, well, and he didn't say all of this, but the initial refugee resettlement program in the United States was really poorly managed. After World War II, we brought in a few Soviet dissidents, and we didn't really do much until after the Vietnam War, when other countries said, these people are yours, you need to step up. And in the late 70s, it was especially Vietnamese boat people who came, and the feds had the idea, well, let's put one in every little town. It would be nice for each town. Well, that wasn't nice for the Vietnamese because they wanted to be together. And so a lot of them migrated to Texas and California. The Hmong just came across the Mekong River, and the feds said, well, they're farmers. They'd be great for California because they need farm workers. And the Hmong are good farmers, but they are not great at taking direction from agribusiness. And so that didn't work either. And so they went on welfare, which was fine with California because that was bringing more federal money into the state. And then when they brought the Cambodians, which was in the early 80s, they said, this isn't working. We need to create some communities because there's no existing Cambodian community. And so Greensboro was one of those places where they put in a couple of hundred and mobilized the community to serve them. And they stayed. They didn't go on welfare. They didn't move away. So for that reason, the national office was asking if we would want to do that. And we said, sure. Then they said, well, there are some complications. This is a very political situation. There are some people in the federal government who do not want this group to come, and others who are zealous advocates. And so I kept asking, well, what's the issue? He said, well, some people showed up at the border, at the Thai-Cambodia border, and they were a group of about 220, 180 men, 20 women, 20 kids, and they came to the border and said, we're out of ammunition and we don't know what to do. And the US and the Thai authorities kind of ignored them. I'm telling some stories that I wasn't supposed to tell, but I'm retired. And a Swiss NGO person took the message to the US Embassy in Bangkok, and after much discussion, it was identified this was the Fulro group that had been recruited by the Special Forces to fight with them, with the promise that once the US defeated the North Vietnamese, that the US would give the highlands back to the Montagnards. Well, that didn't happen. We left. Just before Saigon fell, this is a story that I wasn't supposed to tell either. There was a meeting in the U.S. Embassy and about what are we supposed to do? And the Montagnard's representatives were there explaining, this is a terrible situation. If you all leave, the South Vietnamese will kill us and the North Vietnamese will kill us. And Pierre Cabreau was at the meeting, and Hanto Tene were at the meeting, two Montagnards who were in the South Vietnamese government. And they each gave me a copy of the minutes. What are we supposed to do when you leave? And in the minutes, it's not answered. What they told me is that they were told, keep fighting and we will support you. So this group of 220 that showed up 11 years later were part of the Fulro group who were still trying to liberate, thinking they were part of the US military, still fighting. So that was the challenge, what to do, because it was now public knowledge. Vietnam vets were strong advocates. Other people who cared were strong advocates. They wanted this group to go smoothly and be successful. And so we said, sure, no problem, which was kind of an overstatement. And so they did do several steps in intermediate, which isn't usually done. with refugee groups. They invited a delegation from Greensboro to go to the camp in the Philippines where they had been moved and talk about what it was like. And I was part of that group. It was kind of, in a way, kind of funny. I mean, people received us very graciously and did dances and performances. And then somebody from the Chamber of Commerce explained in great detail how the garbage system worked in Greensboro, which, of course, she's talking in English, and the interpreter don't know all the words for all of these things. And people around me were whispering in the Montagnard community, and somebody said, they're talking about what plants they see, what they could eat when they get there. So it was that was going on. And then they decided, they being the feds again, to send 5 representatives to come ahead of time to see what Greensboro was like, so that they could find out and go back and tell the rest of the people. And that happened, and while they were here, we asked them, because there were 220 people. Typically a refugee resettlement agency may resettle 1 family in a month, family of 5, and that stretches resources. So we decided we had a small office in Raleigh, and we subcontracted with the Catholics in Charlotte. And the 5 leaders decided how to divide them up. They decided that the group was predominantly Raleigh at that moment, and so that we would send about half, about 100, to come to Greensboro. The next biggest group were the Jurai, and so they would go to Raleigh, and there was also a CMA church in Raleigh where the pastor, who had been a missionary, was bilingual. And so they would go there, and then the Benar and the Coho, who had a lot of Catholics, would go to Charlotte. So that was the plan. And so then the week before Thanksgiving, probably the worst possible time to bring in new people, they came with great fanfare. The people from the federal government were there, people from the governor's office were there. Special forces sent a special honor guard to welcome people. We all marched into the airport late that night with about a couple of hundred people there to welcome them with signs of welcoming and things like that. And then they went off in their various directions. Week before Thanksgiving is also just before Christmas, and so all the bumps you could imagine happened. You know, the school system wasn't prepared to take in all these students at that time. Any wrinkles with landlords, it was a bad time to work them out. DSS was having trouble processing paperwork. On and on and on it went. So that first month or so was kind of a nightmare, but then it smoothed out. And at the end of 3 months, which was important measuring time, just about everybody was working, all the adults. And that was, from the Fed's point of view, if they are working and not going on welfare, then that's a success. So they declared a success. In the meantime, we continued to struggle, but it went smoothly enough, and then it became more like a normal resettlement time, other than a couple of other wrinkles. We were told one issue with coming to North Carolina is that these people had strong attachment with special forces. The feds did not want anybody to be resettled in Fayetteville. They want them to understand they are not part of the U.S. military. And also, and this was whispered, it was known that Special Forces retirees were involved in smuggling arms to the Contras. And we do not want the Montagnards to be caught up in that, because they would then be deported. And in fact, one of the volunteer Vietnam vets invited everybody to come live on his land in Asheboro, where he happened to have an airport. And he happened to fly off every other week to go somewhere. But we said, no, they have to be in Greensboro, that is rule. And so people stayed in Greensboro, and we plowed through. And I think that's most of the end. I will mention two more things. Early '89, people were concerned about what's still going on in the Highlands, and the Montagnards were cut off. So Lutheran Family Services and the Montagnard community raised money and raised $35,000 worth of medical supplies that we arranged with the new government in Vietnam to take to the Highlands. And so a small delegation set off with a whole big shipping container of medical supplies, and we got as far as Thailand. And then they said, well, there's some issue with your visas. Just leave it here and we'll take care of it. And we said, no, we're not going to do that. You said we can come. So after a week, we got into Saigon. And then They said, well, there's some issue in the highlands. There's some strange disease going on. It's too dangerous for you to go. Just leave it here with us. We said, no, we're going to wait because we promised to take it to the highlands. And then part of our group was Pierre Cabrew. And he had already gotten his American citizenship. So he figured that he could come with us because as a U.S. citizen, they wouldn't hassle him. And he made some contacts in the highlands. And a friend of his who ran a school in the highlands, a Montagnard University, came down and we did a formal ceremony of giving him the medical supplies with the hopes that he could negotiate to get it in. Then we're getting ready to leave. We're flying out on the, Air France, a giant with hundreds of people who go on it. So we're in line going through the checkout procedure, and when we got to Pierre, it stopped. And then they took Pierre and escorted him away. I said, what's going on? They said, we just have to ask a couple of questions. You guys go ahead, get on the plane, and he'll be along in a few minutes. And we said, no, we're waiting here. No, there's 100 people behind us. So after a few embarrassing moments, they said, okay. They brought Pierre back and he got on with it. And he says they were going to detain him, say that he was suspicious, that he was a suspected terrorist or something. So we made it back. And that was summer of '89, and I left Lutheran Family Services to move to Southeast Asia. That's the end of my story, except that I was in Cambodia in 1992 when you were there. Though we didn't know each other, I was doing something with prosthetics, and we got word that there was a group of people somewhere up in Montagnard who the UNTAC didn't know who they were because they weren't speaking Khmer, and they couldn't figure it out. And somebody finally figured out, these are more people that think they're part of the U.S. military, still trying to fight another 400 or something. And they moved down to Phnom Penh. They wouldn't let me go see them. But that's kind of the end of my story.
Wanted to mention a couple of things in terms of the waves of Montagnard refugees that have left Vietnam and why. In 1992, I was there when the group of 400 Volro fighters and their families and their children were sort of discovered in the Montagnard forest by the Uruguayan battalion of the UN peacekeeping forces. And they tipped off a journalist and who made his way up there and publicized the plight of these people. UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, had known about the group of 400 for several months, actually, but didn't really know what to do because Cambodia was in the process of bringing refugees back to Cambodia to vote as part of the peacekeeping process, not sending refugees out, such as these Montagnards. So it was a publicity by media that got UNHCR to act. That group of 400 was in very desperate straits. They had not only run out of ammunition, there was no food. Babies were sick. One died while the journalist was there. So it was a desperate situation, and fortunately, they were able to be processed on. During the time that I was in Cambodia, there were other waves of Montagnards that came. And I'd like to give a story that shows sort of how haphazard and roughshod it can be when refugees first leave their place and cross a border, and then they're in this remote part of Cambodia. What happens? Well, in 2001, February, I was up in Ratanakiri, where I was living, northeast part of Cambodia near the Central Highlands. Some Jirai friends told me that there was some trouble across the border. And soon enough, I was told that there were 14 Jirai and Ade men hiding even more remote than where I was living. So one of my Jirai friends took me out there on the back of a motorcycle, and I interviewed them in the forest to find out what had happened. They were fleeing from an incredible police and military crackdown in the highlands after they had peacefully protested, an unprecedented mass protest on the Vietnamese side of the border by Montagnards calling for return of their lands and for their freedom of religion. This was the very first group
to cross the border to Cambodia.
After I interviewed them, I went back to Phnom Penh. I briefed the U.S. ambassador. I told UNHCR, and UNHCR agreed to come up to Ratanakiri. So I went first and told my contacts, and all night long, the group of 14 men were being shuttled to my house, which is a simple wooden house. Didn't have running water, bathroom was out there, but they were shuttled all night long into my house. They were very frightened. They were, praying a lot out there. I had them on my back porch where you couldn't see them from the street. And the next morning I went to meet the UNHCR guy at the airport, and we turned my little house into an outpost of UNHCR. At my kitchen table, the UNHCR guy from US, the Cambodian interpreter, I provided the dry interpreter. The interviews went all night. How did they get to Phnom Penh? I arranged for a truck for the UNHCR to get these fellows down to Phnom Penh. And they were very swiftly moved, resettled, right here to Greensboro. We know some of them still. They're here. It was all done very quietly. I think that the U.S. and everybody involved thought, that's it. Let's get these guys out of here. But it wasn't, that's it. More than 2,000 Montagnards followed after that demonstration and subsequent peaceful demonstrations in 2004, 2008, and on. UNHCR eventually set up refugee camps, one in my province, Ratanakiri, one in Mondulkiri. And things got very rough in those camps where Vietnamese police were coming over and pressuring people to go back. The Cambodian police were roughing up refugees who were dissenting, didn't want to hear from the Vietnamese police when they came over. It was getting very, very precarious. So the US government said, we'll just take them all. We'll take 1,000. So everybody's moved down to Phnom Penh, to an abandoned garment factory where 1,000 people are under one roof. The processing took a bit longer, but eventually those 1,000 were resettled. Since then, the resettlement has really slowed down. Cambodia closed its refugee camps, so there's no more problem. So now people who still need to flee for religious freedom reasons and loss of their lands, they have to go to Thailand. And so now we have a situation where the resettlement has slowed down so much that there are 1,000 people waiting in Thailand. Some have been there more than a decade. That's a very quick capsule summary, but I would say that if you compare the numbers of Montagnards who've been resettled here since 1975, the end of the American-Vietnam War, it's about 4,200. Community's larger, has grown, kids and all that, versus some 760,000 ethnic Vietnamese from Vietnam who really deserve protection as well, but the numbers are off. I was going to give some points about human rights conditions in Vietnam that cause people to flee, but in the interest of time, I think I'll save that for a bit later. Thank
you. My name is Lorraine Ahearn. I was a journalist here in Greensboro, so I'm concerned with that part of the story. And I appreciated Melina Ksor talking about how important storytelling is and history. I've changed a lot since 1992. I now teach journalism at Elon University nearby. Journalism has changed a lot too, but I agree with you that I think that the telling and the preservation of these stories is so important. And I want to recognize my friend Sayaka Matsuka, who's here from Triad City Beat, and my other friend Tina Firesheets from Pan Asian Voices of Experience, known as PAVE. These are two people who are preserving stories, which is what I was trying to do in 1992 for the Greensboro News and Record, which was a larger downtown organization at that point. So as Raleigh and Sara explained, there was this 86 group, and then in 1992, the refugee resettlement people in Greensboro found out they had, I think, just a few months to get ready for a much larger wave of people, which was about 400 people coming basically straight out of the jungle, right, after carrying on this fight. So we had a story of course, betrayal and many betrayals by the US government. And what we were trying to do as journalists at that point was to help the community understand where people had come from, rather than just be a story of social services and what is the health department going to do. Where have people come from, and what have they already been through and endured to get here? Because we felt that was important for Greensboro, to not only welcome people and help them find places and find jobs, but to understand them and to understand their experience. So we had some mixed results with that. There was a lot of people who did not welcome folks from Southeast Asia in general. We had, in the meantime, a large influx of ethnic Vietnamese. I want to say more than 1,000, maybe 1,500 people coming in. So there was a lot of confusion about the story. Why were the Montagnards coming to Greensboro? What was this whole chapter with the special forces and this particular bond that they had with Green Berets? So there was a lot to sort of catch us up on. The resettlement was kind of a disaster in some ways. Well, I was just a small child, of course. But one good thing is that people were resettled together who had been through so much. So they were all located mainly to an apartment complex at the corner of Summit and Cone. So that was a good thing, but it was also a horrible thing because those apartments were owned by Bill Agapian. They were roach-infested, dangerous. There was a lot of crime in the neighborhood. So here are people who've already been through this ordeal, dropped into another ordeal. I think the important thing, though, is that they were together, and Hishu can speak to that quite a bit. So this somewhat organic sense of community grew because of individuals. But it took some explaining to churches, to our school system, to our health department. It was just this huge culture shock for people. And we needed to understand and try to help however we could. A little story I can recall is going into the apartments. We called them the Agapian Arms. It was called the Heritage House, and it has a very tragic history since that time. But I went into someone's apartment, and they had been given one of these big old, like circa 1970s TVs, when TVs were still like a piece of furniture. Some church had donated this big old console, and people were watching TV, and they were watching the news, and there were fires, and there were earthquakes, and there were killings, and no one had thought to explain to these folks that this is not the local news. They thought, this is where I live now. It's almost worse. But the reality was, in some ways, things were so unfamiliar that they were a little bit worse. The housing was very difficult. The employment picture was difficult. And of course, communication. But I do want to agree with you that preserving this history and telling this story and telling it and retelling it is so important. So I became very close to the community and continued to cover this as a continuing story. And so Greensboro didn't really have an excuse not to understand how the Montagnards came here and what the history was, because we were constantly reminding people.
I'm here to introduce our honored guest commentators who will hopefully contextualize, fill in the gaps, make connections. We have Angel Katona, Maura Nsonwu, Vung, Ksor, Hlong, and Stephanie Cheston. Angel Katona is a school social worker who has worked with newly arrived immigrants and refugees in Greensboro for the last 24 years. She was the first school social worker at Doris Henderson Newcomers School, where she was instrumental in identifying the needs of newly arrived immigrants and refugees and establishing educational and wellness programs and partnerships. She is now in her 10th year as the lead coordinator of the New Arrivals Institute's Youth Summer Enrichment Program, and as a social worker for the Scale Greensboro Academy. Her compassion for working with immigrants and refugees stems from her growing up as the stepdaughter of a Vietnamese refugee father. Dr. Maura Nsonwu is a professor in the School of Social Work at North Carolina State University. She cherishes her time working as a caseworker for Lutheran Family Services in 1986 when the first group of Montagnards arrived in North Carolina. Vung Ksor is a program officer for community engagement at Church World Services. She's a graduate with a BS in Community and Justice Studies at Guilford College. Hlong, Dr. Hlong, is the current Community Elders Liaison and the former Executive Director of the Montagnard Association, the oldest Asian community-based organization and state contracted refugee service provider in North Carolina. And finally, last but not least, Stephanie Cheston is the Senior Employment Specialist and Refugee Services Supervisor at Montagnard Association, at Montagnard Association. With her prior experience at Lutheran Family Services, her connection to the community spans 37 years. And with that, I invite the commentators to bring insight to the stories and histories.
The conversation that Dr. or Ms. Ahearn was speaking about the importance of people to understand where others come from and what experiences people have been through. And the more we understand about each other, the more compassion we can have. We can grow with our cultural sensitivity, and us people that work in the community can operate through a trauma-informed response. And I think the need for that is still huge. We need more trauma-informed service providers.
I took notes. I was trying to be a good student. It brought back so many memories. My first job out of getting my BSW here at UNCG was with Dr. Raleigh Bailey. I was hired as the social worker when that first group came in 1986. And I think that one of the things that the panelists spoke about that resonated with me was several things. One is the importance of a welcoming community for successful refugee resettlement. And I saw in 1986 that welcoming community was highly organized. We had churches that already knew what groups were going to be in which homes. They were predominantly men, so they went straight to work. We had employment services going, and it was, I think, a really well-oiled wheel. I think, Lorraine, what you mentioned was really that 1992 group, right? When 400 folks came, and that was a huge challenge because you have more children then, and then you were interfacing with different social systems, DSS, and just the communities in general. And so how do we think about getting ourselves organized to be a welcoming community? And the other thing that resonated with me was understanding what I'm calling is like the mosaic or kaleidoscope of understanding the social, political, cultural backgrounds of the folks that you're serving. And so I knew nothing about the Montagnards, but over the years and just listening to stories is so important, and listening to different people's stories, because we don't want to assume that everyone has that same experience, right? And then I also wanted to mention, I think that there is flexibility that we need to understand and learn when we're working with so many different dynamic partners. Raleigh mentioned kind of the political agendas of different partners, and so each group that you're working with, each stakeholder has their own kind of mission or goals or what they want and what they see as successful refugee resettlement or successful work with folks. And then I guess lastly, I would want to comment that working with the Montagnards now since 1986, not only as a caseworker, as a researcher, as a friend, this group is incredibly resilient. And there are so many things that we can learn from the Montagnards to help us understand successful refugee resettlement. So again, I just cherish my time in working with this community.
Hi everyone, my name is Vung Ksor. I came to United States through family unification program. My dad was a refugee. I came to United States with not knowing any English, so yeah, it was hard, it was challenging, but I consider myself a face representing my community because I've done so much. I work as an interpreter, I help with the research projects. Yeah, I'm the new generation, but also I guess half of the understanding a lot about the Montagnard community because I lived half of my life in Vietnam, so I know a lot about the culture. I am from the Ksor tribe. I am currently working as the program officer with the community belonging and transformations with church world service at the headquarters. So we do a lot of community engagement, working across all U.S. programs, welcoming newcomers. So I do have some experience with resettlement programs. I just want to comment on what Sara was saying earlier about the slow, getting the rest of the Montagnard in Thailand. Right now, there's a program, I don't know if you all have heard of, it's called the Welcome Corps, where you can, become a sponsor and find 4 other individuals, so a group of 5 can form a group, start an applications and do the training, do fundraising, and can sponsor a family. So if you know anyone or need, if you want to sponsor a Montagnard that has paperwork or classified as a refugee, that's a way to bring the Montagnard here. Of course, again, it's really slow, but there are ways to do it. Yeah. So any more information, please let me know. Thank you.
Well, my name is Hlong. I am former executive director of the Montagnard Association, and I'm now like a senior community liaison. Still work with the Montagnard community as a volunteer. All the story Dr. Raleigh just told, and Sara, Colm, Lorraine, Ahearn, and Maura Bush, she worked with us. I still remember it's true to the best of my knowledge exactly what happened at that time, since 1986 to now. I don't want to mention that anymore. All I can say today is we still have problems in Vietnam as a human rights violation. For that reason, many Montagnard try to escape to Cambodia, try to escape to Thailand. Now we have more than 1,000 Montagnard refugees in Thailand. They need help, they need to sponsor. We went to State Department, and we also went to the Senator office, Congress office, to raise the issue. So now they have programmed the welcome course. Whoever the churches or personnel would like to sponsor the Montagnard in Vietnam, in Thailand, to come to the United States. Just like the Vung just said, okay, we have to find 5 persons to form a team. Right now, we still have problem in Vietnam as human rights violation. Many political issues still get trouble in that. Discrimination still, even though the war is over, but the discrimination between Vietnamese and our Montagnard people still the same. We also have the same problem in the United States. When we talk about resettlement, Montagnard have cultural shock, difficult to find a job, difficult for language barrier, cannot speak English. Most of the elders, they have stress, they miss their home, they miss their family, and they miss their time in Vietnam, their culture, The problem in the United States here, we still get a problem with health, mental health problem. We still have many kind of disease like hypertension, diabetes, something like that, you see. And many of the young people, now we have a gap between young and older people. But I am willing to work with all the young people. All the young people, Montagnard people today, if you need any question, if you have any problem with the history, with everything like that, you come to us, we will share the story with you. You will know the truth. Now what I see the gap is like the children, the young people, they speak their own way because they live as an American way of life. But the elder people, they keep their own way of life. Now can we work together? If you would like to know all the history, all the problem, why we are here, what will we be in the future, how do we do, what is the first step we do, how to get there, okay? You come with us, we will share the story with you. We rely on you, the young generation of the Montagnard, and we rely on you, all the teachers of university, teach them, help them, lead them. Do not forget their custom, culture, and keep them to be alive. Thank you. That's all I have.
Well, my part in the Montagnard resettlement was to find jobs. During that time, I came aboard in 1987. However, I didn't start immediately working in the job, finding jobs. But then once I got into the role of finding jobs, it was very, as Maura said, very organized and lots of volunteers. And this is some of the things that made job finding easier back then. We would have jobs before the refugees even landed on the plane. So a lot of times they would go to work maybe 2 weeks after arrival. At that time, we would have things in place where we could put 15 people at the same job, which made things easier. And they would be individuals that they were very comfortable with, their friends, and they could still have that communication and times when they can talk once with each other. Another thing was having that support of, as Maura said, also was churches and sponsors. Having that support made things easier because the sponsors would assist with some of the medical appointments, things of that nature. One of the other things is that I thought that was, and I was thinking of this the other day, that came out of the resettlement was that as Lutheran Family Services started the resettlement, there actually was agencies birthed out of that resettlement. And well, it was actually 4, which was the African Services was helped by Raleigh. MAO was actually helped by Raleigh. So it was good things that was birthed out of this resettlement of individuals that actually still made other individuals be able to come. They may not have come through MDA because we're not a resettlement agency, but they did come through some of the other resettlement agencies, and then we had a part to play making things much easier for them. The other piece was something that Lorraine said about the apartments. It was not the best place for them to live. However, it was a place where they could come out of their apartments and meet in groups, talk, be together, support one another. So this was something big because whenever you're resettled in different areas, it's more difficult to, I think, to grow. Some of the ones that have went to work, we had many manufacturing companies, and as you know now, a lot of the manufacturing companies has left, going overseas or whatnot. So this made resettlement easier back then, but now it's become more difficult with having to have more English at certain jobs, having to do applications online, where in the past they did paper applications and they could learn better. You know, those who did have some reading knowledge and went to school to get ESL classes, but now they've gone back to a challenge, some of them, because trying to maneuver online is much difficult to maneuver, trying to fill out applications, even for some Americans, the way that it's done. One of the other things was the transportation piece. Now, it was a problem back then, but it was easier to deal with because we had vans that could take individuals to and from jobs, where one van load would take them for one shift and then bring back the shift that was there and bring them back. Now it's like finding bus transportation, which, you know, the bus system is not the best in Greensboro. So just to compare some of the things that they've been up against, and looking back how things were made easier, working with a lot of the clients. A lot of the clients still to this day, whenever I see them out, some of them are still at their jobs. Some of them have retired from their jobs that I once placed them, which does my heart glad, because they have bought houses, they have contributed to the community. And I read an article that a lot of the refugees have contributed, I think it was billions of dollars into the into the community. So that's something to be proud of, you know, individuals that have helped refugees in the past. I'm trying to think if I had anything else. And a lot of the refugees in the past, they came with a mindset where I want to go to work. I need to provide for my family. I'll do this job. It doesn't matter. I just want to be able to support my family. And then seeing as they grow from one job to the next job, and you know, just kind of made things better, a better life for their families. And the wages was not the best, as you know. We're still at a very low minimum wage, and it's even more difficult because a lot of things now has gone up tremendously. Rent has really increased. You know, just for them, food has increased tremendously. So, just trying to continue to keep refugees employed, keep them becoming self-sufficiency, you know, as quickly as possible, has been my desire, my goal. And like Dr. M said, she said that she's trying to retire. I tried to retire, but it didn't work. It didn't work and hasn't worked. So, but having a heart to serve, you know, whenever it's your time to retire, you know, you will be able to retire. So I'm just happy that I have contributed to the Montagnard community as well as several other communities to make things better for them, a better life for them.
One thing I forgot to mention, I want to say real quickly, the Montagnard Association. Part of our resettlement strategy was to help organize the community as a separate nonprofit because the feds had money that they would give to what they called mutual assistance associations. It was an amazing thing. This was in 1987. These guys came together in our conference room. I said, here are the rules. You have to make these decisions. Mm-hmm. And they argued and yelled for hours. I didn't know what they were saying because they were speaking Raleigh. But there's a lot of strong opinions. But they finally came up with an agreement. It was approved. And even though they could not be a resistance organization, which is what some people wanted, they persevered, and here we are 37 years later, going strong.
And I had the luxury of working beside a community liaison. Her name is Watney. She's not here today, but she is Rade, part of the Montagnard community. And through our work together, we were able to identify needs, and these needs would always change. Because we are a developing society, you know, so of course, as you said, now people have to know how to use the internet and type and all this. And one of the first people I met in my beginning working years was Raleigh Bailey. And he came to the school one day and he said, Angel, what do you think your students and families really need at this time? And I said, a sense of community, a safe place to go after school. And so Raleigh put together these ideas to build community centers in some of the neighborhoods where we had clustered groups of refugees living. And through the Center of New North Carolinians, we had developed these after-school programs that provided tutors from, they were college students from Guilford College and UNCG, and they would come after school and sit with the kids and help them with their homework. They did different activities together. They built community gardens. They took field trips. And through those relationships, they also developed programs for the parents. So they had computer labs set up. I think they had a laundry room at one of the places where people could come and wash their clothes. And then various volunteers from the community were there all the time. So it enhanced the neighborhoods.
thank you all for your excellent stories and your comments. I've been asked to wrap it up, and these conversations can continue at lunch and throughout the day, and I hope they do. I just want to thank Becky, my co-panelist. Becky, do you have any closing thoughts before we?
No, just thank you. Thank you so much to all our panelists.